His big, booming baritone voice is instantly recognizable in this area, and he has a fascinating story to tell. We are talking to Pastor Rick Smith right after this on the Spotlight. Coming to you from the beautiful Alathus building in downtown Russellville, we welcome you into the Spotlight on this Monday. My name is Drew Brent. Thanks so much for joining us. If you are interested in buying or selling your home, give us a call today, 479-968-5668, or cruise on over to russellvilleliving.com, and one of our fine agents will be glad to assist you in your home purchasing or selling needs. Again, that's 479-968-5668, or cruise on over to russellvilleliving.com. Today we have a treat for a guest, a man who has been around in several different scenes in the gospel music world, in the theater world, in the pastoral world. His name is Rick Smith. And Mr. Smith, what a pleasure to have you on here today.
Thank you, Drew. It's great to be here.
You have a fascinating story, in my opinion, because I've known you, how long has it been now? 20 plus years, 25 years, somewhere in there. And we met when I was a youngster. I was probably 10 years old, and my family had decided to do community theater. And Dr. Ardith Morris was the director over at the River Valley Arts Center, and it was in conjunction with Arkansas Tech. And we met while we were doing a production of Oliver Twist.
Right.
How did you get involved in theater?
Well, when I was growing up in high school, we had a drama and speech professor that was really big into Broadway. In fact, our high school, Fraser High School in Memphis, was the first amateur cast in the United States of America to ever produce shows like Man of La Mancha, 1776, and others. And it was a big, big thing. And our guy, we would have the band to do all of the music, the band orchestra in the school. We would have the shop build the set. We would have the annual staff to do all of the marketing and selling of the tickets, and it usually sold out about 3 nights in our high school auditorium. It was a really, really big, big thing, and it got into my blood, and it's just one of those things that when it gets into your blood, you can't get it out.
Right.
So the interesting thing about Oliver Twist was that was the first high school production that I did back in those days in high school. One kid that was in my neighborhood beat me out for the role of Oliver Twist. They were looking for a young kid, and I was in the 6th grade moving into the 7th grade when we did that. But I was a part of the cast nevertheless, and it was a fun thing. So now we come forward all these years, and I don't remember when that was, probably about 1990, 91, somewhere back there. My family and I we're eating at Whataburger. And there was a newspaper nearby, and one of my sons picked it up and said, "Oh, Dad, look, they're having auditions for Oliver Twist over at Tech." And so I looked, and it was a 2-night audition, and this was the 2nd night, and we're sitting there somewhere around 6:30, and it went from like 6 to 8 o'clock. So we decided right there at that table, he and I were going to run over to Tech and audition for Oliver Twist, because he thought it would be a great thing that I did that at his age growing up, and we could do that together. So we did, and that's where I met Ardith Morris, and the rest is kind of history, because we ended up being in the cast. He was one of the orphans, and she cast me in the role of Mr. Bumble.
Right, and I was along in that cast as one of the orphans, and it was fascinating to me because I was 10, and I believe, if I remember correctly, this was 1997. It was the first summer that we had moved here, and I was fascinated by the strange but amazing culture of theater. If you've never been involved, it's really hard to describe, isn't it? The culture of a cast.
Yeah, it really is. It's a very unique kind of experience, and it really takes somebody like Dr. Morris And my teacher in high school, his name, by the way, was John Hester. He's no longer living, but it takes someone with that kind of passion for the theater to really bring it into a community and do it right. And as I said, it got into my blood. When I was on staff at Second Baptist Church here in Russellville for a number of years, we actually did a dinner theater every year for several years and turned the fellowship hall into a big dinner theater. We served a meal and had a full production on stage. And many of the music cantatas, we used to call them cantatas in church work, but
Right.
musicals for Christmas and Easter, normally we would do one of those into a big major production with costumes and lights. And when somebody who has that vision and passion is able to do that for a community and it gets into the blood of participants, it becomes something that's real perpetual. You can't wait till the next year. What are we going to do next year kind of thing.
Exactly. Was that something that you and your parents shared?
It really is not. Nobody in my family is musically inclined or sings. I don't know what happened to me. Maybe I was adopted and they never told me,
What were your parents into? Were they supportive of your decision?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. I started singing when I was really, really young. I remember Drew wasn't maybe 2 years old, but I remember my mother had one of these 45 record players. And I would pull a stool up in front of that and put one of those 45 records on and turn the volume up as loud as it would go. And I'd sing whatever song that was back in those days, the old 50s rocks,
Right.
But I would just sing to the top of my voice. And I sung my first solo in church when I was 9 years old. I was a little dinky dude. I'm still small, but I was a little dinky dude. And I remember they had to bring one of the nursery chairs out of the nursery and put it behind the pulpit so that I could stand on it. And then I was still on my tippy toes,
Right.
looking over the top of the pulpit to the people. So music has been a part of my life all of my life. And I guess it was just something I was born with.
When it's not just the performing arts either, when it comes to your singing career, as it were, it's not just theater. You were also involved in gospel music, still are, I believe, and have been for a number of years, even did so full-time professionally. Talk us through a little bit of that. How did you get started there, and who did you sing with?
Well, I remember when I was about 5 years old, my mother and father had attended a Southern gospel concert in Memphis at the old Ellis Auditorium. It's since been demolished and replaced with a newer one. But you may know this, the Blackwood brothers always had Memphis, Tennessee as their home base.
Mm-hmm.
Anybody that knows anything about Southern gospel music knows that the Blackwood brothers' name is synonymous with gospel music. In fact, James Blackwood was always referred to as Mr. Gospel
Mr.
Music.
Gospel Music.
So the Blackwood brothers about every quarter would bring other groups into Ellis Auditorium and have concerts. And my mother and dad decided that I would probably like that. So when I was about 5 years old, they took me to one of those concerts, and I was hooked. I mean, from the get-go, I was hooked. And it became something that I always wanted to have as a part of my life. When I grew up and got into high school, I discovered, this disc jockey voice that God gave to me, and I managed to secure an on-air personality disc jockey role at a Southern gospel radio station in the Memphis market. And so for my last year of high school and following that, I was a gospel music disc jockey on WTNN radio in Millington, Tennessee.
I want you to finish that story, but I want to add some context to that. To be in any radio station in the top 50 market like Memphis, Tennessee is, to be on that young is it doesn't happen today. It absolutely does not happen today. That's a huge deal that occurred for you so young.
Well, thank you. It was a great experience for me, and it gave me an opportunity to meet a lot of people in Southern gospel music, one of which was a tall, lanky bass singer from the mountains of North Carolina who had been a bass singer for the Blackwood brothers, but had left them in the late 60s and early 70s and started his own group called the Apostles.
Mm-hmm.
London Paris was his name, London Paris and the Apostles. And one day I had graduated from high school, I'd moved on to Jackson, Tennessee, and was in college. at Union University. And I came back from eating one night, and there was a note attached to my door that told me I needed to call my dad at my grandmother's house in Memphis, which really bothered me because I thought maybe something was wrong. But I was on church staff in Jackson as a minister of music and youth, and my kids were doing a band concert at the local school they wanted me to come to, and I was in a hurry to get there. I didn't have time really to stop and make this phone call, but I managed to run by the phone in those days. Now, I'm not real old, Drew, but in those days we didn't have cell phones. You were still using the coin things down the lobby.
Still a phone booth, yeah.
So I called, and of course I'm a poor college kid. I have no money, so I called collect to my grandmother's house. She answered the phone, and she refused to accept the charges. And I'm like, what is the deal here? Well, I'm late for the concert. I've got to go. So I thought maybe they'll have an intermission, and maybe I can find a phone. And that happened. So I finally called again. This time my dad answered the phone, and he accepted the charges. And I'm just like, Dad, what's going on? He said, everything's fine, son. I said, are you okay? And I said, well, I'm just upset. So anyway, he says, if you're not sitting down, you probably need to sit down. And I said, Dad, please tell me what is going on here. He said, I got a phone call tonight from London, Paris, and he wants to know if you'd be interested in joining the Apostles as lead singer. And Dad's right. I should have sat down. Right. So anyway, I did finally make contact with London that night, and he had just lost a baritone singer, actually. And his lead singer was going to move over to the baritone role, and he wanted me to consider singing lead with the Apostles. And I didn't have a lot of time to think about it. This was on I forget, maybe a Monday or a Tuesday night, and London said, we're going up into the Northeast this weekend, and I need to pick you up Wednesday night at midnight at the Holiday Inn there on the interstate outside Jackson. And so I did, and we went up to the Northeast, and here I am, this young college kid, and I'm living the dream that I've always had all my life, to sing professionally in a gospel quartet. And I'm on this bus now with this well-known, gospel group. That their first year out in 1972, they won the Dove Award by the Gospel Music Association as the most promising new gospel talent in 1972.
And to add some context to the folks who may not know, a Dove Award is sort of like a Christian Grammy.
That's
essentially.
Right. That's exactly right. So I'm on the bus, and we're heading to the Northeast, and we did a couple of dates in churches. But the big thing was, we were appearing on the Courier's Homecoming event in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And there's like 9,000 people in this big arena. And I'm making my first debut performance as a singer with a professional group. And I didn't have any problem keeping up with the rhythm because my knees were doing so right. as I sung. But that was the beginning. And as we came back to Jackson after that weekend, I made the decision to join the group, and for the next year and a half or so, it was one of the greatest experiences of my life. We traveled all over the United States and half of Canada. We were able to appear with the interesting thing was we gained a singer who had another group that had been contracted by a Nashville agency to be, of all things, the warm-up act for country music stars and fair dates across the country. And so we were able to honor those dates and appear with people like Donna Fargo and Bill Anderson and Hank Thompson. Some of you folks won't know who those names are, but we enjoyed working with a lot of neat people, and it was a great experience for me.
I want to go back to something that you said a few minutes ago, and I want to elaborate because this is fascinating to me. You said you're making your professional debut, and you're doing so in a packed house of 9,000, 10,000 people. I don't want to know about the aftermath. You told me about that already. Your knees were knocking, you were on stage. I want you to walk me through 10 minutes before you get on stage.
Wow. Well, one of the things that was so pressuring about that, well, a couple of things. Number one, of course, when you're a singer and you're a disc jockey, and you're playing all these people's records on the air, most folks don't know this, but your microphone is, of course, off, and you're singing with them, So I knew a lot of their songs, and I knew a lot about the way quartets singers sing. Most people don't know this, but most people in a professional quartet, they don't have songs book and shape notes. They do it all by ear. Mm-hmm. And you learn your parts, and there's certain patterns around which you sing. And so I had learned all of that, and it was easy then for me to just move in to a lot of their popular songs because I already knew them and there wasn't a lot of great preparation. But still, we had to rehearse, and we rehearsed on the bus on the way to Pennsylvania. So I had a lot of time to really prepare for this big event in front of all these people. And then the other thing was when I walked into the auditorium, all of these groups that I had been playing on the radio, who were kind of my heroes in gospel music, they're all there. So not only am I going to be singing in front of these thousands of people with a group I've only rehearsed with on the bus for several hours, but I'm going to be doing it among all these heroes and peers that I've been playing all my life. And that was pretty intimidating. I mean, that's pressure. That's like the guy on the PGA Tour with the last putt to win on the 18th green on Sunday afternoon. It's that kind of pressure. So that's why my knees were really knocking more than anything else.
I remember a time when I was working at Channel 7. I was 19. I was in college still. They had signed me as a producer, and I was a massive Razorback fan. I grew up, with Frank Broyles and Keith Jackson, and then Paul Eels was the voice. And I remember just having these. I hate to use the word, but idolize these people. These are the people who I wanted so badly to be like, or to be broadcasters like. So I'm working at Channel 7 as a sports producer, and football season comes around, and one of my first assignments is you're going to go produce the live shots at War Memorial for the Razorback game. Get up there, don't make a mistake. And I'm 19, I'm terrified. And as I go into the press box, I see Chuck Barrett, who had just taken over because Paul Eels had tragically passed away the year before. There was Keith Jackson. There was Matt Jones. There was Basil. There was all these people. And they are watching to make sure I don't totally mess this thing up. That's what they're hoping. I mean, they're like, hey, this 19-year-old kid's about to try to do something amazing. I can't, that pressure to me, I thought, okay, there's no other pressure like that. I can't imagine that. When you're looking at these people who you have been literally spinning their records, because back in those days, you were literally spinning records in the radio stations, was there almost a dichotomy of, wow, I'm a little starstruck, but then also, I'm here, I've made it?
There was. I learned that those people are just common folks, just like all the rest of us are. I think part of what you go through is, can I really do this? Am I good enough to do this? And I remember that one of the songs that we rehearsed was kind of one of my, if you want to call it, sugar sticks. I know we're talking about gospel music, and we're giving a little bit of secular sort of designations to those things, but the message certainly wasn't lost.
Right.
But one of the songs that I had been accustomed to singing in a lot of places was Bill Gaither's song, Because He Lives.
Right.
And we did an arrangement of that on stage that night. And I was featured, of course, on that song. And when I finished, that crowd of 9,000 gave us a standing ovation. And it was the moment for me that let me understand, you can do this. You can do this with a bunch of guys, and the work that you do together, blends well, and it touches people's lives. And that was kind of a pivotal point for me in getting over that intimidation of, can I really do this? But you also have to understand, you're just excited that you're realizing a dream you've always had, and you got to kind of get over, the emotion of that, kind of focus and do what you need to do.
We were talking to Rick Smith. He is a pastor, a well-known bassist here in the area. His voice is well-known across the country from ads and different radio stations that we'll talk about here in a few minutes. But the first thing we want to talk about is, if you're interested in buying or selling your home, you need to give us a call today. It's 479-968-5668, or cruise on over to RussellvilleLiving.com. One of our fine agents will be happy to help you. There are new homes being listed all the time. Don't wait. This is your opportunity right now. Give us a call, 479-968-5668, or cruise on over to RussellvilleLiving.com. Rick, I have another question, because I do see a little bit of a parallel. We started our careers young, and probably there was some, at least for me, there was a conversation of I was producing, for ESPN at 20, and you're not supposed to be able to do that, and that I was terrified. But once you get that standing ovation, once you get that pat on the back from one of your heroes, was it hard for you? Because it was hard for me to balance the, hey, okay, now I've got the validation, I can do this, I can belong, and getting a little cocky, because I 100% had that problem.
Yeah, yeah. I really never struggled in that way. It was just an affirmation to me. But I understand what you're saying, and I think a lot of that is just youth.
Yeah.
Uh, if we get too successful, and I never had the problem of getting too rich at a young age, you don't know how to really handle that and
Right.
and manage it well. But I always had to remember that this is not just a job, and this is not just about fame and whatever notoriety may come from it. You're singing the only kind of music that can change a life.
Right.
And therefore, it is a ministry. And the primary thing that's got to happen here is not for you to be glorified, but for God to be glorified. And to be able to offer that message in such a way. I'm standing here on this stage, and there's 9,000 people in front of me, and what kind of needs does that represent?
Right.
Some of those people probably came, because they're going through some sort of a hardship in their life, and this was kind of a pause for them. And so in that pause, is there a message in a song that God can use to touch their heart and give them hope, give them guidance and leadership? You can't ever lose sight of that. And one of the deep convictions of my life, Drew, that's always been, I don't know that I could have, but I'm assuming that I at least had some potential in my talent to have done any kind of music that I wanted to do.
Sure.
But I recognized from a very early age that whatever gift that I had, that was given to me for God or from God. And I needed to use that in some way back to Him for His glory and for His will and plan and purpose in my life. And I've always strived and thrived every way I could to do that.
It's striking to me too, because that's been something that you carried with you through the rest of your life.
Absolutely.
I mean, this you go through this, and then you eventually meet your wife. You eventually have children. You eventually take a pastorate. Kind of walk me through that process with that same philosophy.
Well, I actually met Carol through the gospel music experience. She was a real good friend, her and her sister, to the people that promoted the apostles up in the upper Midwest, up in Iowa, Wisconsin. And so that's where we met. And when our relationship grew to the place where we knew that we were going to be together and be married, I made the decision to come off the road, because in those days, gospel quartets would leave and be gone for 8, 10, 12 days at a time, come home for a couple of days and head out and do the same thing again. But if you were going to Canada or you were going out to the West Coast, you'd be gone a good 4 to 6 weeks because of the time difference to travel. And you needed to do enough going out and staying there and then coming back to make it worth your while financially,
Right.
even. And I knew that was not going to be real conducive to a young couple starting a marriage and so forth. So I came off the road and went into a church staff work, and really then only continued the gospel singing with groups through the years from one place to another. And probably the longest tenure was a group of guys and folks over in the Little Rock area back in, what was it, somewhere around 96, 97. We decided to do some singing together, and we kind of brought the name out of retirement, the Apostles, and we did some great things there for about 15 years before I finally decided to, come back into the pastoral work and just kind of settle down. My grandkids are big enough now to where it just seemed like every time we were trying to get together as a family and celebrate a grandchild's birthday, the Apostles were engaged.
Right.
And I felt the Lord just saying, you've done this for a long, long time, It's served a great purpose in your life. And it's not that I won't ever do it again, but God was saying it's time to move into something that more than likely just more settles you into being at home and being here. And so now for the last 7 years, I've been pastoring at Moreland First Baptist Church.
Right. How did you adjust to that transition?
It really wasn't hard because I love preaching.
Right.
I love preaching as much, maybe a little bit more so at times than I do singing. And they always used to get mad at me because I'd preach a sermon before we sung a song. And so,
right.
But I always have loved preaching and teaching. That's one of my primary spiritual gifts. And so it was not a hard transition for me at all. Traveling is hard.
Traveling is hard. I know that life well. It's interesting to me too, because as talented as you are, you're a man of many talents. That your family is equally as talented, albeit in different ways. Talk to me a little bit about your wife and your kids.
Well, they've always been very, very supportive of things that I've done. Carol has been a working mom outside of the home throughout most of our lives, and supportive wife in terms of ministry work and so forth. We've just celebrated 45 years together, and it quite literally has been the best of times and the worst of times.
Right.
And she has been a faithful example of love and grace and lots of times forgiveness. And so my kids have always been the same. We've got 3 sons, and we're all grown, and one of them has given us a couple of grandkids, and that's always two of them have given us grandkids. I'm see 66 in the mind.
Got
thing.
it, yeah.
So they've always been very, very supportive, and our guys have played guitars a little bit and strummed a little bit, but they've mostly been more inclined into my oldest son hunting and fishing, which I never really did a whole lot of.
Right.
And our youngest son, he's greatly inspired in golf and has made quite a name for himself in the state on the golf course. And so they've all grown to find their ways. And I've always just encouraged my family and everyone that I come in contact with. God has a will and a plan and a purpose for your life. It's uniquely just for you, and it's related to those gifts and talents and skills that He has given to you. And the greatest joy and happiness and fulfillment and even effectiveness that you will ever have in life is to plug all that together and be walking in the very center of God's will for your life, doing what He gifted you and called you to do. And I think the greatest expression of love that you can give to anybody is to help them find out what that is and support them and encourage them in every way you can to walk in that way, because you're doing the greatest help for them.
When you started coming back into being at home more, I want you to walk me through the kind of transition in your mind from being out on the road to then being a young husband, now a father. Do you see some parallels in your life on how you operate in each one of those avenues?
Well, you have to, I think you have to be able to compartmentalize in a lot of ways. You have to realize that you've got maybe different hats, and we would think the ideal thing is to just blend all of those.
Right.
And to degrees that sometimes works, but I think more than often you have to more or less compartmentalize those. You have to, maybe take the business hat off at the end of the day and put the daddy and the husband hat on. Heard a story one time about a guy that observed his next door neighbor pulling into his driveway every day, and he'd go out in the yard and he'd touch this tree before he went into the house. And then one morning he happened to notice this same guy came out and he walked out to that same tree and touched it before he got into his car and left. And that so intrigued him, he watched it for several days, and the guy did the same thing, coming in and going out every day. So finally the curiosity got the best of him, and he went and he said, okay, you got to explain to me what this touching the tree business is. And he said, well, I have a lot of details that I have to keep up with in my work. and there's a lot of pressure and there's a lot of stress and there's a lot of problems that I have to juggle and take care of. And he said, those things don't need to find a place in my home. When I come here, I need to be dad and I need to be husband. So he said, when I pull into my driveway, I take those things and I lay them at the foot of that tree. I don't take them in my house. And then when I come out in the morning, I go back to that tree and pick them up and take them back to the office and deal with them there. I think that's a good illustration of the sort of compartmentalizing I'm talking about. There is some blending, but you just have to learn to not cause one to be a priority over the other when it shouldn't be.
We are talking to Pastor Rick Smith. He's the pastor over at Moreland First Baptist Church. Of course, he's also former lead singer of the Apostles. His booming bass voice is instantly recognizable here in the River Valley. It's been a pleasure to speak with him. We've got more coming up with him in just a few minutes. But if you're interested in buying or selling your home, give us a call today, 479-968-5668, or cruise on over to russellvilleliving.com. Coming up tomorrow on the Spotlight, he's the commissioner of the Great American Conference, Will Pruitt, as college football is about to kick back off amid all of the coronavirus concerns. We're going to talk to him about that. Plus, we're going to have a conversation about a shortage of high school officials in the football season. He is, of course, a high school football official himself. We'll be able to have those conversations and more. That's coming up tomorrow on the Spotlight. As we're wrapping up with you, Rick, I'd like to ask you this question. And I ask people, not just on the Spotlight, but in general, when I find people who are well-traveled, well-experienced, who have a wealth of knowledge, this is the question. If you could give somebody who is young in their marriage, starting this thing out, what advice would you give them?
Wow. That's a loaded question. How much time do we have left?
We're already over. You're fine.
Well, I think that family has to have a priority. I'm preaching a series right now in our church at Moreland about Jesus getting the disciples ready for them to venture out into the ministry that he has started. Of course, that's all in preparation for them to carry on the work of the church after he has ascended into heaven. And so he's talking to them about what they should expect. And one of the things that he says to them is that you're going to suffer persecution. You're going to meet resistance and rejection. And some of that is going to come from your own home. It's going to come from the people that you least expect it to come from. And it's not that Jesus was not saying that that family is not important and that you should make family a priority. But what he was saying was nothing, anyone, anytime, anywhere is more important in my life than you are if you've surrendered your heart and life to Christ. And so an operational set of priorities in my mind has always been God first, and your marriage and your spouse second, and your children and your family next. And below that then comes the other things like church and job and the various ways in which we prioritize those things. I think the biggest thing I would emphasize to people today is when God created marriage, he said that, by the way, God is the one who invented the whole idea of people falling in love and being married. And his word is the instruction manual for how it is best to work. And he says that a man shall leave his father and mother and cleave unto his wife. That word in the Greek and in the Hebrew means to be permanently glued together. And so I would encourage all young people to go into a marriage relationship with the idea in mind, this is for life. We don't get mad at each other down the road and decide that we can't live with each other and just run off to the divorce court. We work through the hard times, the difficult times, the times where one of us really hurts each other, betrays trust. It's not the problems that you go through that define you. It's how you deal with those problems that makes the difference. And no problem has to bust a marriage up. It depends upon how those two people decide to deal with that problem, whether they're going to take it and correct it and bring the blessing out of the brokenness and make the lemonade out of the lemons, whatever it takes. But we're going to work through this and allow it to make us stronger as a result. That's what constitutes permanency and commitment in marriage and makes people celebrate 45 and 50 and 60 years down the road.
I'll wrap up with this story that I always found fascinating. Before my great-grandmother died in 2006, they were about to celebrate their 63rd wedding anniversary. And during this gathering, somebody asked them, how did you make it 63 years? And my granny, I'll never forget it. She said, I never once thought about divorcing this man, but about 100,000 times I thought about killing him.
Not divorce, but murder.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah. So I
she would have been out by now.
Right, exactly. I'd have already done my time and gotten out at this point. Rick, thank you so much for being here. It's a pleasure.
Thank you, Drew. I enjoyed visiting with you and kind of reminiscing on things of life that's been very, very important to me and helped shape, who I am now at 66 years of age. That's fun.
Well, these are the kind of stories that we love to hear right here on the Spotlight. And we've got more of them for you coming up this week. As we mentioned, GAC Commissioner Will Pruitt joins us tomorrow. By the way, if you miss any of the Spotlight episodes, you can check them out on the Facebook archive, YouTube. You can also go to Spotify, Google Play, or iTunes and listen to them there. And plus, do not miss Spotlight on KARV. That's AM 610 and 93.1 FM every Friday morning at 8:30. All right, coming up tomorrow, Will Pruitt joins us. He's the commissioner of the Great American Conference. For now, my name is Drew Brent. Thanks so much for joining us here on the Spotlight. We'll see you right back here tomorrow.